Hey friends, welcome back to Embrace the Question. This is our Bible Study with Me series, and we are still in Genesis. We're in Genesis chapter 10. Before we get started, especially if you have been on this ride with us so far, if you have made it through all the videos and you are on Genesis chapter 10 with us, I want you to bounce over to the blog. The URL is in the notes. Go over to my blog. Yes, it's a Buy Me a Coffee blog. That does not obligate you to buy me a coffee. I'm not asking you to buy me a coffee. I want you to read the post that was out today, which is the 9th of August. The post from the 9th of August. Okay? It's entitled The Two Falls. And that came from our study to this point, and it has blown my mind, and I would love to see it blow your mind. Because, one, it's profound. Two, it's the kind of thing that only happens after you do the study. It's something that has to percolate, so to speak. It has to sit a while in order to appear. And that's why we are doing this study. Okay, just go over there and read it and let me know in the comments, or you can reply on the blog if you want to. Let me know if you have ever heard anything like that before, because it was new to me. So I look forward to your response from that entry. All right, we are in Genesis, again, Genesis chapter 10. This one on the outset might seem a little bit dry to you, but I promise you, it isn't. It's really chock full of stuff. Now, Genesis 11 is going to be fun. Genesis 11 is the story of Babel, the Tower of Babel. So this is part of the build-up to that, and we're going to talk about Nimrod, etc. So hey, it's obligatory for me to invite you to subscribe if you haven't. Please do that. We would love to have you along with us on this journey. Okay, let's go. All right, so we are at the end of the flood story. And I think this is a really good time to do a little bit of summarization, because it ends a chapter of creation. We've had the fall. We've had, if you will, the second fall, which explained in the blog. And now we need to, before we abandon it and just delve right into the story of Abraham, which we will be doing in the next 2 chapters, we need to take a closer look, or at least a higher view, of what we've learned from this. Okay, so let's jet over to Isaiah 54. Isaiah 54. There are a lot of chapters in Isaiah. Isaiah 54, and we're going to hit verse 7 and read until 14. Okay, and then we're going to compare this to some of the things that Jesus said, and I think we'll be a lot better off. We'll have a lot more rounded understanding of where we are now. Okay, with the Noah story. Okay, for a brief moment, I deserted you, but with great compassion I will gather you. In overflowing anger, for a moment I hid my face from you, but with everlasting love I will have compassion on you, says the Lord your Redeemer. This is like the days of Noah to me. As I swore that the waters of Noah should no more go over the earth, so I have sworn that I will not be angry with you and will not rebuke you. For the mountains may depart, and the hills may be removed, but my steadfast love shall not depart from you, and my covenant of peace shall not be removed, said the Lord, who has compassion on you. I want to stop right there and just throw this out there. That is very apocalyptic in nature. This language is, this verbiage. Think about this. For the mountains may depart and the hills may be removed, Did that happen in the flood? Answer is yes and no. The hills didn't go anywhere, except they were concealed by the rising waters. Okay, we think about that. I honestly can tell you that I've never considered that as a solution to the disappearing hills problem, right? You think of the mountains being removed, you think of some massive force that comes through and levels the mountains. But Isaiah is giving us a hint here that it can also be that the mountains are simply concealed by, in this case, the flood of water, but the Bible talks about another flood of glory. Well, you say, Steve, well, floods of glory will never conceal Mount Everest. No, but it will conceal the mountains in your life. The mountains, those figurative mountains that we all have to climb. Glory can conceal those, okay? Throwing that out there. Food for thought. All right, verse 11. O afflicted one, storm-tossed and not comforted, behold, I will set your stones in antimony and lay your foundations with sapphires. I will make your pinnacles of agate, your gates of carbuncles, and all your wall of precious stones. All your children shall be taught by the Lord, and great shall be the peace of your children. In righteousness you shall be established. You shall be far from oppression, for you shall not fear, and from terror, for it shall not come near you. All right, that is Isaiah's take. And I would say that Isaiah is speaking to those inside the ark, under the protection of God himself. You would agree, I'm sure, with that one. So let's go to passage number 2, which is Matthew 24. Matthew 24, verses 36. And we have read this one before, but we were not comparing it. So let's read this one alongside of our Isaiah passage. But concerning that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father only. For as were the days of Noah, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. For as in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day when Noah entered the ark. And they were unaware until the flood came and swept them all away. So will be the coming of the Son of Man. How far am I going? 2 more. Then 2 men will be in the field, one will be taken and one left. 2 women will be grinding at the mill, one will be taken and one left. Therefore stay awake, for you do not know on what day your Lord is coming. Okay, so let's talk about these 2. We've already decided that Noah, or that Isaiah was talking about those inside the protection of the ark. Jesus appears to be talking to those outside of the protection of the ark. Okay? In both cases, the door shutting appears to either represent salvation for those that are safe or judgment for those that are not safe. Okay? It's an odd thing for me to see these, because when I think of Jesus, I think of him speaking more Isaiah's narrative, and when I think of Isaiah, I think of Isaiah speaking more Jesus's narrative. But there's context to deal with. One is Jesus is trying to both encourage those who are believers, but to also exhort those who are kind of on the fence. Exhort those who may not know who their allegiance belongs to. While Isaiah, on the other hand, is speaking to a group of people who have long been desolate. They've been war-torn. They are always facing invasion. And so Isaiah, in this case, is comforting a people that really do need comfort. Jesus is trying to exhort a people that are too comfortable. Okay, so we have these two angles of approach, both using the story of Noah. All right, so now let's go back to Genesis chapter 10. These are the generations of the sons of Noah: Shem, Ham, and Japheth, his three sons that got on the boat with him. Sons were born to them after the flood. The sons of Japheth: Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshach, and Tyrus. The sons of Gomer: Ashkenaz, Rephath, and Togarmah. Some of these names you'll remember or you'll recognize. Perhaps like when I see Togarmah, I think of the judgment on Tyre or Tyre, and the Battle of Magog. Right? I read these names in Ezekiel. Okay, the sons of Gomer: Ashkenaz, Rephath, and Togarmah. The sons of Javan are Elisha, Tarshish, Kittim, and Dodanim. And from these, the coastland peoples spread in their lands, each with his own language, by their clans in their nations. That's fascinating, that you can have a son that migrates away from home, has kids, and they develop their own language. Now, one thing that is definitely worth saying, especially now, because we're going to see this a lot in Scripture, is that just because the Hebrew says so-and-so is so-and-so's father doesn't necessarily mean an immediate father, because they didn't really have a word for grandfather, great-great-grandfather, great-great-great-grandfather, which is why Jesus is always saying, your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Well, that was, 1,500, 2,000 years before the people were born that he's speaking to. That really comes into play in Daniel as well, because I'm trying to figure out Nebuchadnezzar, and I'm trying to figure out, well, who is this Belteshazzar? Is this Nebuchadnezzar's son? Is it his grandson? And the truth is, not really sure, because there is not that word. Okay, so just keep that in mind as we go. When people migrate away from home, it could be 2 or 3, 4 generations out that they develop their own language, but that's still fascinating to me. All right. So they're the coastland peoples. They're the coastland peoples. Now, when we scroll up again, the sons of Japheth become the coastland peoples. All right. Now the sons of Ham: Cush, Egypt, Put, and Canaan. Remember, cursed be Canaan from our story yesterday. The sons of Cush are Seba, Havilah, Sabta, Re'amah, and Sabteka. The sons of Re'amah are Sheba and Dedan. Again, I'm reminded these from Ezekiel. Cush fathered Nimrod. He was the first on earth to be a mighty man. I want to come back to Nimrod. That's verse 8. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore, it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. The beginning of his kingdom was Babel, Erech, Akkad, Calneh, and the land of Shinar. From that land he went into Assyria and built Nineveh, Rehoboth-ur, Calah, and Rezin, between Nineveh and Calah, and that is the great city. I believe it's talking about Nineveh there. Egypt, Egypt fathered Ludim. Egypt fathered. All right. Sorry for the jumping around there. Egypt. Where is Egypt? He fathered Ludim, Anamim, and Lahabim, Nephtuhim. These are all, the ems are all plurals, so they're speaking of peoples, naturally. Where did I miss Egypt being talked about? There it is. Sons of Ham are Cush, Egypt, Put, and Canaan. Now, a lot of these are African countries, right? Egypt, Put, I believe, is, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but Put is Ethiopia. All of these have modern equivalents. Most all of these have modern equivalents. So there's Egypt. He was a son of Ham. We know that Egypt becomes synonymous with sin and bondage, and that happens during especially the Egyptian captivity after our story of Joseph, which we will still have in Genesis. Okay? All right. So I got sidetracked. Egypt fathered Ludim, Anamim, Lehabim, Nephtuhim, all these ems, Pathrusim, Casluhim, from whom the Philistines came, interesting that, and Caphtorim. All right. Canaan, cursed be Canaan. Canaan fathered Sidon, his firstborn, and Heth, and the Jebusites, and the Amorites, and the Girgashites, and the Hivites, and the Arkites, and the Sinites, and the Arvadites, and the Zemarites, and the Hemathites. Afterward, the clans of the Canaanites dispersed. So what we're seeing here, Canaan, his kids become the enemies of Israel. We've heard most of those names, and they come from whenever either Israel is making their exodus through the wilderness or they have entered into the land of Canaan. Okay? So we find Israel kind of at the dead center of this international coalition of families. All right? Where are we at now? Let's see. Verse 19. And the territory of the Canaanites extended from Sidon in the direction of Gerar as far as Gaza, a modern name, and in the direction of Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, and Zeboim as far as Lasha. These are the sons of Ham by their clans, their languages, their lands, and their nations. To Shem also, the father of all the children of Eber. Eber is where we get the name, the word Hebrew. It started out Hebrew or Eberim, sons of Eber. Okay. The elder brother of Japheth. Children were born, and these are they. The sons of Shem are Elam, Asher, Arphaxad, Lud, and Aram. Aram, think of Syria. Aramaic, Aram. I'm thinking of Naaman, the Syrian, came from Aram, right? The sons of Aram are Uz, Hul, Gether, and Mash. Arphaxad fathered Shelah, and Shelah fathered Eber. To Eber were born two sons. The name of the one was Peleg, for in his days the earth was divided, and his brother's name was Joktan. All right, let's talk about Eber just briefly, because in his days the earth is divided. What does that mean? Most of the creation scientists that I have listened to agree that if we're talking about a worldwide flood, the weight of water on the surface of the earth is so great that, and the earth has a crust on it that varies in thickness. So you can think of, you can just think of it as being very thick in places and very thin in places, but all with this huge weight of water on it. What is that going to do? Well, it's going to push down where the crust is thin, and when it pushes down, it's going to tilt up at the edges. So you're going to have the creation of deep seas and high mountains, which is why you do find some fairly high mountains right on the edge of some very deep seas. Mount Kilauea in Hawaii, known as the highest mountain in the world, although most of it is submerged, right? Why would that happen? Because the earth is dividing over it's settling from the weight of the water. I think that's an interesting thing to consider, but it's taken how many generations for this to happen? Okay, so Joktan fathered Almodad, Sheleph, Hazarmaveth. Man, how'd you like to name your kids this? Zerah, Hadaram, Uzal, Diklah, Obal, Abimael, Sheba, Ophir, Havilah, and Jobab. Not Jobab. I'm in Arkansas, so Jobab is fairly, common. Jobab, not so much. All of these were the sons of Joktan. Joktan had a few sons. All right, and then the territory in which they lived extended from Mesha in the direction of Sephar to the hill country of the east. These are the sons of Shem, by their clans, their languages, their lands, and their nations. These are the clans of the sons of Noah, according to their genealogies, in their nations, and from these the nations spread abroad on the earth after the flood. Okay, so that lays a foundation for us to build on. This is exactly what happened after Noah got off the boat. All right, but let's go back to verse 8. Verse 8, Cush fathered Nimrod. Who was this guy Nimrod? The name Nimrod becomes synonymous with rebellion, and you don't get a really good feel for it in Genesis 10. Now, we're going to talk about Babel, which is in Genesis chapter 11, and that is going to shed a lot of light. But Nimrod was recognized as the founder of imperialism. And that's when you have a bunch of people groups on the earth that recognize the rise of one, not because he is next in line, not because of a blood lineage, but because he's someone that has achieved dominion by conquest or by achievement. Okay? So he is, if you will, a Saul type figure, a King Saul type figure, just somebody that is made king based on stature, not on bloodline. All right, let's take a look at that next verse. He's the first on earth to be a mighty man. Let's take a look at that. If we look over here at mighty one, mighty man, we are going to see a word that is somewhat familiar. Can I blow it up any? Yes, I can. Gibor. Powerful, a tyrant, a giant, strong and valiant. We talked about this because this was the description given in Genesis chapter 6 of the Nephilim. They were the mighty men, the men of renown. And we talked a bit about the probability of these guys being actual giants. Were they regular sized people with superhuman capabilities, or were they really big? And could it be that they were made big because of genetic alterations, mutations? They were just big, gnarly folks that were scary. It depends on the legends, the mythology, if you will, about Nimrod. But Nimrod is thought by some to have been very, very big. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. It says that right here, verse 9. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. That translates to a mighty hunter in the face of God, or a mighty hunter despite God. Now, what could that possibly mean? Well, I've given it some thought, and honestly, a mighty hunter makes sense. If you're still relatively new off the boat, people are hunting. They're hunting for a living. What are they hunting? If there were dinosaurs on the boat, especially babies, eggs maybe, they're reptiles, these are now big. These are now huge. What are the various tribes and clans feeding themselves with? Well, of course they can raise chickens, but that's not much of a, it's not really much of something to brag about, is it? If you're, a mighty hunter and you want to rise above your fellows in the clan, you don't want to be a chicken killer. You want to go out and you want to be a provider for the whole clan. So you're going to take on these big brutes of animals. Perhaps that's what happened. That's my idea. A mighty hunter. But it states that he is a mighty hunter and seems to indicate that he shifted. Perhaps his fame was made by hunting these enormous beasts, which would not have been a safe or easy thing to do. And maybe, though, he was so good at it, maybe he was so brave that he was elevated by his clansmen to a place of authority. It is noted that Nimrod, he wasn't a natural blood, as far as he wasn't next in line to rule anyone. So he did it on extraordinary feats. And that's interesting. He must have been quite a guy, okay? In Greek mythology, he would be the one that's synonymous with Orion, of whom we have constellations. We have a constellation named after Orion. So Orion and Nimrod would be the same. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, which we'll talk about. So Babel was the beginning of what he did. We will talk about that again next week, but while we're here, it seems out of that land, most of us, I think, know the story of Babel, and that the language was confused there, and that's where people were ultimately dispersed, okay? And out of that land, he went forth and builded Nineveh and the city of Rehoboth and Calah and Rezin, between Nineveh and Calah. The same is a great city. Okay, so this guy was a city builder. He was a bit of a tyrant. He was obviously egotistical. He was probably very vicious, according to legend. He wasn't able to ever just settle down and be king. He was never able to just be okay with what he had. He always had to move on, found another city, move on, found another city. I think he founded in all about 8 cities, and Nineveh became one of the most wicked cities of all, as did Babylon. Now Babylon, or Babel, becomes Babylon, which reaches its peak in the book of Daniel under the king Nebuchadnezzar. And it falls in that same book to the Medo-Persian Empire. So Babel can actually be researched today. They have found the ruins of Babel on the eastern banks of the Euphrates River. I have friends that have been there. It's not a real safe place to go these days, so don't book tickets. But it is right outside of Baghdad, across the river. Saddam Hussein tried to restore it. He was in the process of restoring it when he met his end. So these are interesting cities, all at one time very evil cities, and all began by this man Nimrod, whom we'll talk about again next time. So that is it. for Genesis 10. I know that is a lot for a chapter that is mostly just genealogical records, right? But there is a lot there. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you are hanging in there with the study. And hey, we're going to have fun on the next one because it's a little bit more storybook-like and a lot less textbook-like. But until then, hope you have a blessed week. Take care. Peace.